Good morning. Don't consider me Pastor Hunter right now. He sent me over here to talk to you today. He did mention he would still like to get paid for today, but no, I'm just kidding. He sent me over here to talk to you because there's something that happened to me in my life a long time ago that I've never gotten over, and I just wanted to share some of this with you. This thing that happened to me changed me. It had a profound impact on my life and changed me. And I just want to talk to you a little bit about that. And then Pastor Hunter has asked me to give an invitation today as well. So what exactly happened? In my family, I'd never been aware of any kind of heart issues or any kind of health issues that traditionally we find that gets passed on in our family through our genes and things like that. And I had no idea that I had anything wrong with me until one afternoon. One afternoon, everything was just normal, and on April the 12th, 2007, I started feeling a little bit sick. And at first, I just sort of wrote it off. I'm not feeling good. But it continued to get worse, and it progressively got worse. So finally, after much contemplation, I decided I would try to make it to the hospital. And when I got to the hospital, they immediately began hooking wires and gadgets up to me. And by this point, I was feeling really, really bad. I didn't know what exactly was happening to me. I would later find out that I had what they called a cardiac event, whatever that means. It was a cardiac event of some sort. I took a moment this morning just to write down a few notes because I didn't want to forget any of the details. I wanted to make sure that I did the church and your pastor a good job by not forgetting any of the details. I had this cardiac event, and I was laying in a hospital room, and suddenly something strange began to happen. I started feeling this type of feeling that I had never felt before. The only way I can describe it is imagine if your eyes inside of your head begin to fall backwards inside of your head and everything becomes dark around you, and suddenly your entire world is dark. The next thing I knew, I wasn't in that hospital room anymore. They told me later words I'd been dead, clinically dead, for 13 minutes. So I'm laying in this hospital room. My hearing is gone. I can't hear anyone. I know there's doctors and nurses running around, but I can't hear them. I don't even really see them. I see shapes moving, but at this point, I was just in and out of consciousness. And then something happened to me that was really bizarre. The first thing that I experienced was really something pretty amazing, because I've got to be honest with you, I never was what you would call a church person. I never was into going to church and never really believed all the Bible stuff, and I thought Jesus may have been a real person or something like that, but Savior of the world, no. But I was a good person. I was nice to people. I didn't cheat anybody. I was always nice to folks, and I always lived like I wanted to treat others the way that I want to be treated and things like that. And so if there is a heaven, I thought to myself, surely that's where I'm going to go because I'm nice to people. I treat people the way that I want to be treated. I'm not mean. I don't steal from people. I don't bother anybody. I don't hurt anybody. I mind my own business most of the time. But I'm just a normal person like you or anyone else. The strangest thing began to happen because suddenly I realized I was no longer in that hospital room, and you always hear people that have a near-death experience, which is what they're saying that I had. I never knew what a near-death experience was until after this event, and I began to study, and I found out there were other people that had events similar to what I had. I noticed that they're all a little bit different. Mine was very unique and different. Whenever I realized I was no longer in that hospital room, whenever I noticed that there was this tunnel of light that everybody talks about, instead of going toward the tunnel, I noticed that I was slowly going away from the tunnel. It was like the tunnel of light was getting a little smaller and a little smaller. But at this time, I felt no pain. I felt very light. I could tell I wasn't in my body. It wasn't what I would call a bad feeling. It was just in that initial moment, I felt weightless. I felt helpless. And then I began to feel hopeless. And I thought, this is strange, because if there is an afterlife and surely everybody goes to heaven, why do I feel hopeless? And why do I feel this way? I had the sense that I was still alive, of course. I mean, I had a consciousness, but I think that was about all I had. I remember whenever I was going away from that tunnel of light, suddenly the tunnel of light was no longer a tunnel. It was a dot of light, and then it was gone, and I was in complete darkness. Now, dear friends, when I tell you that I was in darkness, I don't mean it was like you were at home and you turned the light out. This was a kind of darkness that I've never experienced before. I've never experienced anything so dark as the darkness that I was in. It was really strange. It was really bizarre, because I did not know where I was at. I did not know what was going to happen to me. And I did not feel any physical pain. But what was strange is whenever I was in that tunnel and I was what felt like going away from the tunnel, on each side of that tunnel I could see faces of people. And the weird thing is, they were trying to speak to me, but I didn't hear them with an audible voice. Rather, I felt them. I know this is weird. Gosh, I haven't thought about this in a long time. I remember feeling their emotions. It's as if whenever I would look at a person, I could feel what they were feeling. I could feel the pain that they felt. I could feel the hopelessness that they felt. Some people, when I would look at them, I could just feel everything that they were feeling. And it was not a good feeling for me. I had no idea where I was. I didn't know where I was going. All I knew is that I'd had a cardiac event. I was in the hospital, and everything went dark. And now I'm not in the hospital anymore. People have often asked me, they said, did you feel alone in this experience? It always felt like someone was standing over my right shoulder behind me, but I never saw them. I still don't know who that was. But I just remember feeling the pain. I felt the hopelessness of the people that I saw. It was really strange. I was in this place of darkness, and I began to ask myself, am I even alive? I remember trying to feel for my hand, and it felt like I could move my hand. It felt like I had a hand, but I knew there was no physical property there. It was the strangest feeling. But I was encompassed in complete darkness. The two things that I remember vividly about this experience was, as I said, I was moving away from the tunnel of light. I said I felt someone standing over my shoulder. It was really weird how that I could feel what they felt. Wherever I was, no words were being used. Everything was by feeling. A person could look at me and I could feel what they were saying to me, as strange as that sounds. They didn't have to say anything. I could feel their emotion would tell me everything I needed to know. It's almost as if that's the way communication was done. Everything was frequency and vibration. It was very strange. No words were needed for me to feel what I felt. I had this feeling of eternal outer darkness. There was no sense of time. And friends, I was only declared clinically dead for 13 minutes. But during this time period, when I'm ensconced in this deep, dark place that I've never been before, there was no time. I had no memory from one moment to the next, to the next, to the next. It wasn't like I felt like I'd been unconscious for 10 minutes and then I came back. It was nothing like that. When I was in this place, it felt like I was there for 1,000 years. It sounds really strange because how in the world do you have a 13-minute experience, but yet you feel like you lived 1,000 years? That's what it felt like. It felt like I was in this place of outer darkness for 1,000 years. Could have been 2,000 years. I don't know. It just seemed like an eternity to me. People talk about different ages. The age of Aquarius and the age of this, and they talk about all the long periods of time. I felt like I experienced all of that. Eternity wasn't just for me a linear time, spectrum of time. For me, eternity was a moment to moment to moment feeling. Every passing what you and I would consider a second felt like 100 years. I felt eternity. And I spent what felt like to me a lifetime. 10 lifetimes, 100 lifetimes in this eternal darkness. The second thing that I remember very vividly is after spending all of this time, what appeared to me as time, in this darkness, what felt like eons and what felt like an eternity in this darkness. Suddenly, without warning, I began feeling like I was descending. I'd always heard that if you go to heaven, you go up, but if you go to the other place, you go down. That's how I felt. I felt as if I was descending into this place. This was not my imagination. Later, after I had come out of all this and I began to share this, people would say, well, that was just your imagination. That was just the medication they gave you at the hospital. That was just the trauma your body was going through. That was just your brain releasing chemicals to help you deal with it. Friends, they can say what they want to say, but I know what I experienced. And I know that what I experienced was real. In fact, it was more real and it was more lucid than the world that you and I are living in right now. Wherever I went for those 13 minutes, which felt like an eternity to me, wherever I went was more real than the physical world, the natural world we're living in now. I began to descend, and as I began to descend, the feeling of hopelessness became greater and greater and greater. Now, after this entire experience was over with, I picked up the Christian Bible and I began to try to read around in the Bible because I'd heard since I was a kid about heaven and hell and people when they die. And I've got to be honest with you, I always thought that if a person was a good Christian person, that when they died, they would open their eyes and they would be in this glorious place called heaven. And I thought if you were this real wicked, evil person like Hitler or somebody like that, they would die and they would go to this terrible place called hell. But not me. Not me. I'm just a regular person. Again, I'm not tooting my own horn, but I've always been polite and nice to people. I've never stolen from anybody. I've never taken anything that wasn't mine that I can remember. I've never been a mean person. Never been an aggressive person. Never been a violent person. So why me? Why would I be experiencing this for? I did feel a great sense of something missing within me. Whatever me was in that place, there was something great that was missing. There was like this great void inside of my consciousness That's the only way I can describe it. I would later find out from reading the Bible that that great void that I was missing was a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. That's what I was missing. I didn't know that. I just thought if I were a good person, I would make it to the promised land, right? If there was such a thing. But here I am in complete and total outer darkness, and I have this feeling that I'm falling or descending. I read in Matthew chapter 8 and verse number 12 how Jesus described how that earthly leaders will pass away and some of them will be cast into outer darkness. When I read that, that got my attention because I've experienced that outer darkness. Again, in Matthew 22:13, Jesus gives a parable about people who are unprepared to enter into the kingdom of God. And because they're unprepared, I'll presume that they had that void that I felt. It says in your Bible they were cast into outer darkness. You can imagine my surprise whenever I read these verses after experiencing what I experienced. In Matthew 25:30, Jesus gives a parable where he proclaims that those servants who are worthless servants are cast into outer darkness. Jesus mentions this place of outer darkness a few times in the New Testament. And after my experience and after I read that, it had such a great impact on me. How in the world could the ancient people that wrote the Christian Bible, how could they know about what I experienced? On that day, when I had a cardiac event, and I was in that hospital room, and suddenly everything went dim. My hearing, my eyesight, and eventually everything was completely black. They declared me dead for 13 minutes. How could the ancient people know about this? I thought maybe one of them had experienced the same thing I had experienced, and I realized it was Jesus saying a lot of these things. I knew that my journey was not over with. When it first happened, I thought maybe I was never going to leave that place of darkness because, as I said a moment ago, 13 minutes here in the natural world felt like 13 million years in whatever world I was in. I never thought I was going to escape. The other thing about that place of being in outer darkness is I didn't have the freedom just to move around like I thought you would think that you would. You're a consciousness. You're there. You know what's going on. But you don't feel yourself having a physical body. As I said earlier, I kept feeling to see if I had hands. I would try to move a little to see if I really was alive, if I really was existing or not. And the only way that I can describe it is it was as if it was my spirit that was there. My body was laying back in that hospital bed. But my spirit was experiencing something that I did not believe was real, and I did not think, even if it was real, that I would ever experience. I've said this 2 or 3 times. I'm going to say it again. I can't even begin to describe the feeling of hopelessness that came over me. The idea of no hope, no freedom, there's no going back, it's over. It was at this point it had dawned on me that I had died. But why am I in darkness? And why now, after all these, what seemed to me to be millions of years, I don't even know how long it was, for some reason now I'm descending. And up until this point, everything that I had felt had been purely and strictly emotional. I felt the emotional pain of other people in that tunnel that I talked about. I felt my own guilt and my own pain within myself of things I wish that I would have done different. Oh, I wish I would have told my mom or my dad this, or I wish I would have done that different. I wish I would have done that different. That was kind of what I felt at first. But as I began to descend, I began to feel something that felt more tangible and more real. I began to feel the heat. of what I'd always heard people call hell. And I have to tell you, I never really believed in this place called hell. I'd always just used the word hell as a byword, whenever I got angry about something or I asked somebody, what are you looking at? I would use the word hell. I had no idea that hell was an actual place, that it was a real place where people really go. I thought to myself, could a God of love really let me go to this place? And then it dawned on me, I had no relationship with God. I didn't know Jesus Christ. I might have believed in a God out there somewhere, but I had no relationship with God. The strangest thing about this experience as well, I don't want to make sure I remember to tell you this too. I had this feeling on the inside of me, my soul did, my spirit. And the only way I can describe this feeling, this is the only way I can describe this feeling, it was as if inside of me I knew in that instant and in that moment that God really was real. And that the way I had envisioned God was not at all who God really was. And I found out that this God, this creative being who made me and made everything, I realized that He was no longer a part of my being. And that feeling of hopelessness, of being separated from the Creator, spiraled me into a sense of depression unlike anything I've ever felt in the natural realm. Depression, hopelessness, and I realized it was my fault. You hear a lot of people get angry at God. I've done that before. Well, God, you're God. Why did you let this happen? Well, you're God. You could have stopped that. But there was something in me that I just knew it to be a fact. This was not God's fault that I was here. So then why am I here? How long will I be here? The further down I descended, the worse it got. I'd heard people talk about, I heard the screams from hell. I didn't hear anything like that. But I felt the pain of other people. I felt the sorrow and the hopelessness at other people who were in this place. I didn't see them when I got to this point, but I could feel them. I remember after this was over with, reading in Matthew 13, verses 41 to 42, Jesus gives a parable about lost people being gathered up and cast into the fire. I read in Luke chapter 16, verses 19 to 31, about this rich man who had a lot of good things in life, and he had no relationship with God at all. But when he died, he went to this place called hell. I think in the old language they called it Hades or something like that, and sometimes it was called Sheol in the Old Testament. But I knew it was the same place that I had experienced. I knew it was. It had to be. Because now I'm experiencing the feeling of the flames of the fire. And I read in that passage, Luke 19, Jesus told a story about this man, and this man himself also felt the same thing. He said, send this beggar that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and put it to my tongue, for I'm tormented in this flame. Friends, oh, gosh, I hadn't thought about this. The thirst was insanity. You ever been so thirsty before you would do just about anything to get something to drink? This was beyond anything like that you can imagine. The thirst was enough to drive me insane. The fire and the heat on my body did not consume me, or what I perceived to be my body. I guess you would say my spirit. It didn't consume me, but I still felt it. It was unlike anything I'd experienced before. I've often wondered what was worse, the pain of what I felt or the emotions that I could sense. And then I finally decided it was neither. It was that feeling of eternity. I'm never going to leave. I don't know how long I was in that place of darkness. But I was in this place that I call hell for what felt like another eternity. How can 13 minutes in the natural realm equate to eternities and eons and eons and eons in the spirit realm? My friends here at Bethel Church, I have no explanation. I don't know. I'm not God. I'm not a scientist. I don't know how that's even possible. I just know that it did. The closest thing that I suppose I could compare it to was years ago I had a surgery and they put me to sleep to do a surgical procedure. And the procedure lasted for several hours, but for me it was just like I went to sleep and woke right back up again. In that hospital room, when I had this cardiac event, everything faded away and I was in this place of darkness for an eternity, maybe even longer. Then I began to descend, and I felt the actual fires of hell beneath me. I was very scared. I was tormented, and I was so thirsty. I can't even begin to even describe the thirst. I remember whenever they put the paddles on my body, they shocked me into coherency, and I was back in my room again. I was so thirsty, I begged them for water. Everything was alive. Everything that I saw in that tunnel was alive. It wasn't dead. It was alive. It was so alive, my friends, that the darkness was so dark that even the darkness felt like it was alive, as if it was moving itself. How could this be? How is this even possible that this could happen? You know, I had heard preachers on occasion preach about things like that, and I thought, that's just religion, you know. That's just the religious people saying all that stuff. Well, what in the world is some old ancient book called the Bible? How is that going to help me in my modern world? And yet, I began to realize that nothing is what I thought it was. This world that we live in, all of you, me, none of this is real. Oh, we think it is, but it's not. This world is not the real world. Everything was pulsating with life, almost as if everything was interconnected to one another. I felt like I was connected to the darkness. I was a part of it. I felt like I was connected to the fire. I was a part of it. I felt like I was connected to the people's pain. I was a part of that. To describe what I went through, there are no words to fully give it justice. The separation from God, there was no love, there was no life where I was at. All of that was gone. None of that existed. There was no sunshine. There were no birds singing. There was no wind blowing. There was no chair to sit in or a horizon to look at. Gosh, the hopelessness. I can't begin to tell you what that hopeless feeling was like. I read a verse in this Bible later on after I came to. And it was a really strange verse. It was in the New Testament. This apostle named Peter wrote, and he said that with God, one day is like 1,000 years. Prior to my experience, I would have never known what that meant. But now I understand it. Just a few moments on the other side. There's no time, and it feels like eternity. In my hopeless desperation, in this moment where I thought that I was never going to ever come back, I thought I was going to be in this darkness. I thought I was going to be in this fire that I couldn't even see. I thought I was going to feel the pain and the desperation and the hurt and the guilt and the hopelessness of all those who were there. I didn't see them with my eyes, but I could feel them. I could tell we were all interconnected. In all of this, I was hopeless. I was desperate. I didn't know what to do. But one thing that I remembered as a child going to church. I remember going to vacation Bible school, and I remember my parents would drop me off, and I remember the teacher talking about if you'll call on the name of Jesus, He'll save you. I didn't have an audible voice that I could just open my mouth and shout with, but with every fiber of my being, I did the very best that I possibly could to just cry out and call out to Jesus Christ. I didn't know what to say. I just simply said, Jesus, save me. That's all I knew to say. And it was at that moment, friends, I can't explain this, but something happened. It felt like I'd just been taken out of this place. Suddenly, I see that tunnel of light again. But now I'm going towards the light instead of going away from the light. The feeling of hopelessness and depression and eternity and all of that began to slowly dissipate. And I felt like there was going to be an end to this. And when the light finally came so close that I stepped through the light, I found myself back laying in the hospital bed, looking up at the lights at the ceiling. They brought me back. I didn't know it at the time, but I know it now. God gave me a second chance. Oh, He didn't give me a second chance to be perfect. He didn't give me a second chance to never make any mistakes ever again. He didn't give me a second chance just so I could go around and share my experience with good people like you. He gave me a second chance because He loved me. Because He loves me, He wanted me to have an opportunity to be born again. You see, friends, I studied the Bible a little bit after this experience for a few years. I was very curious about it. I talked to other people who had near-death experiences. I talked to them and what they saw, what they went through, and again, everybody's is just a little bit different. But for anybody to say that it's not real, they don't know what they're talking about because they've never experienced it. Unless you experience it, you'll never know how real it is. So I started reading the Bible, wondering if I would find answers, wondering if I would figure out the reason why I experienced the things that I did. And I found out several things. Number one, I found out that hell is a real place, but I also found out heaven's a real place too. I had this feeling as I was crossing from the darkness into the light. I did not hear a voice, but I just had this feeling. It was almost as if information and knowledge permeated into my being. No one had to tell me, I just knew it. As I was crossing over from the darkness into the light, just before opening my eyes and being back in the hospital room, I caught a glimpse of a city. It was just for a brief second, but I caught a glimpse of this city. And the joy that permeated off of this city, the happiness that came from this city. I could hear singing in the distance, unlike anything I've ever heard before. And I just knew that that had to be heaven. I woke up in that hospital room, shaken, but alive. They said I'd been clinically dead for 13 minutes. They pumped me up full of drugs and different things, and by the time all of this was over and I was able to go home, started going to a little church and reading my Bible and trying to figure out Are there answers in this book to help me understand what I went through and what I experienced? And I found out something amazing that I want to share with you. I found out that the reason that people die like I did and went to hell the way that I did wasn't because they were bad people. Had nothing to do with whether you're good or whether you're bad, whether you're a nice person or a mean person. But I found out from reading this book that where I go when I die depended on one truth. And that one truth is, do I have a relationship with Jesus Christ? Because I read in Colossians 1 that Jesus Christ had the authority over all things in heaven and in earth, under the earth and in the earth. I don't know if I was in the earth or not, but it sure felt like I was in a very, very dark place. I prayed. It wasn't a fancy prayer. I just said, God, I don't know why what happened to me. But I know that one day I'm going to take my last breath, and it's going to be permanent. And I don't ever want to experience that again. I want to experience that city that I saw. I want to experience the singing that was being done, the frequency and the vibration that I felt from that. That, just for that split second, that frequency and vibration, I had no pain. I had so much joy. I had so much happiness. I was so calm. I was so peaceful. And then I woke up in that hospital room. I realized the one thing that I had been missing was that relationship with Jesus Christ. And when I asked Jesus Christ to save me, something happened to me on the inside. I just felt different. And I now know that what I experienced was a journey to hell and back. And the reason that I had experienced it was because God in His infinite mercy chose to reach down and try to help me have an understanding of what it means to know Him. He could have just left me there, and I could have died on that operating table in that hospital, and I would not be here today to share this with you. But God didn't do that. He gave me a chance. So I promised God that every time I would stand before a group of people like yourself, that I would extend that invitation to you as well. So could I ask you this morning to bow your heads with me? With your heads bowed and your eyes closed, I just want to, I'm not going to do anything fancy here. I just want to present something to you. Maybe you've never experienced anything like what I'm talking about, but maybe that you have. A lot more people have had near-death experiences and NDEs than what people believe. And maybe you're here and you would say, I don't know why I experienced that. I felt the same way. But I believe the reason I experienced it was so that God could bring me to the place where I am now. Maybe you're here and you would say, Pastor Hunter, I don't want that to be me. I don't want to be the one that closes my eyes and spends eternity in outer darkness and then descends into this place the ancient people called Hades, Sheol, the grave, the final place, the last destination, hell, if you will. I don't want to be there. Friend, if you don't want to be there, you don't have to be there either. You can come to a place in your life where you recognize that without Jesus Christ, I'm lost and I'm nothing. I don't mean you have to be a religious person, because the weird thing is, when I was going through that tunnel, I could feel there were many religious people in that tunnel, and I could feel their pain too. Because you see, they chose religion over a relationship with Jesus. But I want to encourage you to choose a relationship with Jesus Christ. How do I do that? It's very simple. I'm going to say a prayer here in just a moment. And you've got to come to a place and a moment in your life to where you're ready to be serious with God and say, Lord, regardless of what I've done in the past, I'm going to turn from my sinful ways and I'm going to follow you, and I'm going to have a relationship with you, Lord. Lord Jesus, you died on the cross and you shed your blood on Calvary and you paid the price so that I could be born again. I want that today, Lord. I want to be saved. I want to be a believer. I'm not looking to be a religious person. I just want to be right with God. If that's you today, I want to pray for you. Could I encourage you to make that decision? And if you make that decision, take it a step further. Say, God, I want to be baptized. I want to display my faith in you. You don't have to have a near-death experience to believe in Jesus Christ. But I'll tell you this, if you've ever had one, you'll know that what I'm telling you is a fact, that the other side is real, that there's something there. It's not my imagination. It wasn't some drug they gave me. It wasn't chemicals in my brain. It was real. And I experienced it. If you're here this morning and you would like to have that relationship with Jesus Christ, I'm going to pray with you. And I hope that you'll pray too. And if there's anybody here that would like for me to pray with you, come on up here and I'll pray with you. Whatever's going on in your mind and your heart today, we'll pray together. Father, I want to come to you in prayer, and I want to just thank you for the privilege of sharing this story with Bethel Missionary Baptist Church. Lord, there might be somebody here that's experienced what I've experienced. There may be people here that have never experienced anything like that before, but God, they need to know how real it is. And Lord, I pray today that you will touch the hearts of everyone under the sound of my voice.